Module John Madden. I'm sitting in the shade in Veracruz, Mexico, about 100 yards from the Gulf of Mexico. And I have been back here in Veracruz for about 17 days, having spent 7 weeks up in the mountains east of here in an official magical pueblo of Mexico called Orizaba. I this morning was digging. I'm way behind in terms of posting my YouTube videos. I shoot tons of videos and many of them never get posted because I never get time enough on a Wi-Fi to get everything posted. For a long time I was trying to post to both TikTok, where I had 1,000 followers and 1,000 to 1,500 people could see a video. But old people like me, my age mates, just don't do TikTok. So many months ago I dropped TikTok altogether and only post to YouTube. So this morning I was digging back into my videos from my 7 weeks in Orizaba and was reminded of how incredibly happy I was in that magical pueblo. So much so that in the coffee shop down the street I wept a lot. Every video I looked at, I went, "You were so incredibly happy in that town." I knew all the time that I was just there briefly, that my destination was to go out to the Riviera Maya, to be by the ocean. I'm going to try to tell the story of my life in terms of the dialectic between the mountains and the sea. I'm not sure I can grab it all. It's quite a story and it's going to be kind of long. But I need to organize this for myself because this morning I found myself in the throes of that very issue. So happy in the mountains. High. Colorado Rocky Mountain High. Just half a mile from here down the beach in front of the Hotel Mari Tierra, that's been quite a base of mine here in Veracruz. I was interviewing a Mexican who had spent time in Colorado. Marcos, I think his name was. And he was quite a guy. And within the space of about a minute YouTube short, when he said how much, and he had good English because he had lived and worked many years in Colorado. And at the mention of being in the Colorado mountains, he and I together burst into John Denver's song, Colorado Rocky Mountain High. Yeah, so I do get high in the mountains. I was landlocked as a kid. I was a working class kid in the western suburbs of Chicago, originally the west side of Chicago, before my family fled because unscrupulous landlords were coming around saying, "They're coming." Those black people, one of them moved in on the next block. Pretty soon your house will be worth nothing. Right now I'll give you half of what it's worth and you'd better take it. So the Irish and the Italians and Polish from the west side of Chicago fled outside the city limits, and we ended up in Brookfield, a blue-collar suburb southwest of Chicago. Sandy, who I ended up marrying, was similarly, she was a South Side Polak, but she was a similarly working-class kid from a family that she was the first generation to go to college as I was. And we met at Loyola University of Chicago, which was mostly a commuter school, and my fraternity and the place was filled with working-class kids looking to change their lives by becoming doctors or dentists or lawyers. I was in pre-med there. So neither of us had a background of travel. Europe? No. Had our parents taken us to Europe? No. Had our parents taken us to Disney World, which I guess wasn't even a thing then? To the ocean? No. Neither of us had seen the ocean. Mountains? No. No. My family idea of a vacation was to go to a lake in Wisconsin, just across the state line, and go to a little cottage park that was filled with mostly South Side Chicago people. But I did get a taste of the water and being in the water, and it infected me. I ended up later on making a lot of vacations way north in Wisconsin where there were loons on the lake, and I could swim way out in a big lake. But it was Midwest vacations, you know. I went to grad school. We got married, and it's a terrible story about how we got married. It was a very ungrounded decision and rushed. And I, after taking a year off from college to try to figure out, did I really want to be a doctor? And I worked in a mental health center and did not like the psychiatrist. My plan was to be a doctor psychiatrist. I didn't like the psychiatrists. I liked the psychologists. They were much more real human people. So I said, good, I'll be a psychologist. And went to Rochester, New York. So this was a big departure for us. We thought we were going east, but when we got to Rochester, we found that one of the nicknames of Rochester was the gateway to the Midwest. And my classmates from New York City, most of them, considered Rochester a rube town. And me from Chicago, they mostly didn't think I knew Al Capone, but they probably thought I knew how to milk a cow because I was from the Midwest. But what an expansion of my consciousness by getting to know New Yorkers. And Sandy and I started taking our vacations 1 year to the ocean for her, she was the ocean person, and 1 year to the mountains for me. And we did camping and backpacking out in the Rockies. And 1 year we took a vacation to Nova Scotia, Canada, where she as a kid had a dream that she would live someday. Where she got Nova Scotia from, but that's what she dreamed of. And I took a year after my 4 years of grad school, staying close to my campus because I hadn't finished the dissertation. We moved to the country, and we lived in the country in the rolling hills of the Finger Lakes area of upstate New York. Real upstate New York, not up the Hudson, which is what New Yorkers call upstate. Hour up the Hudson, you're upstate. No, this was real upstate, and it was real beautiful rolling hills, and we lived out in the country. So that was quite a departure for us. And I took a post at a really wonderful liberal arts college there. When I got my dissertation done and it was time to go someplace else, I was all about a mental health center in Flagstaff, Arizona, to go by the Grand Canyon and get out to the southwest, which seemed just right for me. And I had bad allergies, so the southwest seemed right. She was going to go along with that, though, that she was an ocean person. But I had a dream when I was applying for that job in Flagstaff. I had a dream where I'm driving down the highway and it says to the mountains, and I was really excited, and I couldn't turn off fast enough. I missed the exit, and the sign said this way to the ocean, and I got happy. Well, the way it turned out was that Flagstaff offer would have required me to leave my college before the term was ended, and I wouldn't do that to my students. And I found a job offer in Nova Scotia. Now, Canada was rigorously opposed to bringing in Americans to take Canadian jobs. You had to prove that you couldn't get somebody. But this little dinky mental health center in Nova Scotia could demonstrate that they couldn't get a psychologist from Canada to go out there. And Sandy got to live out her dream. We ended up buying a little cottage right on the Bay of Fundy, so we got to experience the power of the ocean, not the open ocean, but the highest tides in the world there, and sure was the power of the ocean. And what a departure. Where we lived in the little hamlet of Joggins, we could have lived there the rest of our lives and we'd have still been the Americans down the road. Well, for lots of reasons that didn't work out, including that Sandy finally said, you know, I followed your career long enough. I got my master's when you got your PhD. I want my PhD in education. And we moved to Syracuse, New York, for her to go to a place that had a very fine program that focused on mainstreaming, getting the special needs folks out of the institutions and back in the community. And it led to her having quite a career in that field. She became quite a noted administrator of a huge program in Louisville, Kentucky. So Sandy getting into grad school did not help our relationship. Our relationship was in tatters. It never was solid. It always was on very, very shaky footing and never really a happy match at all, personally or sexually or anything. So when Sandy got to Syracuse, she totally threw herself into her program, really essentially dropped her relationship with me. Although being Catholic, she never would want a divorce, but all her energy went into her graduate studies. When finally I said, this is no marriage anymore, I'm out, she was enraged at me because she thought she could never marry again, even though we had not had sex for a year. She hadn't spontaneously touched me for a year. Eventually, when we split up, Sandy took a job in Louisville, Kentucky, where one of her mentors was running a program, a very visionary program about special ed there. And I went back to Chicago, stay close to my kid. With 4 years in Syracuse, he had been just down the block, and half of the time with each of us, this was, as Sandy said, serious divorce. We'll be in different cities. I tried to get close to, I both get back to my roots in Chicago and stay reachable to Terry, where I could go down there 300 miles, 1 weekend a month, and he could come to me for all his vacations. I'll fast forward to 2004. I was in Chicago. I had been misdiagnosed as bipolar disorder and spent 30 years as a psychologist who always hated diagnoses, hating myself, feeling like damaged goods, and convinced to take horrid psychotropic meds, which in my grad school we fought. We thought that was barbaric, and it actually is. I can say that pretty clearly now. But I spent 30 years in the throes of hating myself and not having the life force to push back. Finally, as a desperate attempt to find new life, I had the love of my adult life was a woman named Jennifer, and we had broken up. But when I was reaching for a place to try to start a new life away from Chicago, Jennifer and several of our friends had been doing training in Asheville, North Carolina. Asheville was a big training hub for the medical arts for the whole region around there. And a visionary woman at the training center, Mahek, was bringing in Jennifer and several of her body-mind psychotherapy friends to do training there. I didn't get to go, but I kept hearing from Jennifer and all these other people how magical was Asheville, North Carolina, south, but very progressive, and up in the mountains in the south, right on the spine of the Blue Ridge Mountains. So I think Jennifer maybe never forgives the fact that I took Asheville. I couldn't go to the Southwest because my plan was I'm going to go and not tell anybody where I've gone and see if I can make it, if I can somehow restart my life and not commit suicide. Well, I couldn't go, and the original version, I wasn't telling anybody where I was going. I couldn't go to the Southwest because everybody had known for a long time that I wanted to go to the Southwest, to Santa Fe or Taos. So I went to Asheville, and I did finally tell people where I was going. Well, that was a big departure. That was the South, but not the deep South. Asheville was a very progressive, artsy hub. Even in the rest of the county, it was one of the county legislators branded Asheville as a cesspool of sin because there were gays and hippies, and an enterprising person in Asheville printed up t-shirts saying "Sweet Cesspool of Sin," and we were proud of it. Well, combination of the COVID hitting Asheville, and I had finally had hit bottom and had a spiritual experience that had me, well, out of the blue, happy after 30 years. And I got an offer from a friend to leave Asheville and go out to the mountains, a little basement apartment she had, and I threw myself into my mountain man existence. After 3 months at my friend's place, I continued to push further into what they call the high mountains, deep Appalachia, discovering I loved those mountains. It was crazy that I had spent 16 years in the city in Asheville, and also discovering what disinformation us elites were caught in, that we thought the rednecks out in the Appalachian Mountains were terrible people. They were stunningly wonderful people. So one stone after another falling from my eyes. I thought I'd stay there forever. But the second spring out in those mountains, my little Chihuahua and I both got violently sick from some new plant that came out. And I had been thrown out of Eden. I had to leave the Blue Ridge Mountains. I said, well, allergies, let's go to the Southwest. So my plan was to go to the Southwest. But along the way, I stopped in Louisville, Kentucky to see my son, who, his mom, he had been so close to me right up through his early teen years, but he had a bad experience moving to Chicago and living with me when Jennifer was on the scene. They clashed, he left mad, and our relationship was in tatters, which made his mom super happy. She lived a mile from him. She felt like the rightful parent because of all the years I was a long-distance parent. And in some ways she was, but in some ways I was his heart and soul because I brought out his wildness and supported his emotional side. He couldn't be angry with her, but he could with me. He could really let all his feelings rip with me. But he had gone down a wormhole of, my mom was always the good parent. You were always the guy who only cared about himself, weren't there for me. So the first step in heading for the Southwest was to go to Louisville, Kentucky and try to reach out to my son, which did not succeed. But part of the gift I got in Louisville, this is looking so blurry. I hope this just doesn't look so blurry as it looks to me. In Louisville, I did an awful lot of running to the country to get away from the city and the awful climate between blacks and whites and terrible police who were, every time I parked in my camper van in a city park, they had threatened to arrest me. So I'd go to the country, and way out in the country, I was camped by a river. There was a drought that summer. That was the summer of 21. But underground, it was still running, and I swam in a watering hole, a hole in the river that was quite a recreation area for the locals. That was my first chance to swim, and I said, gee, I'm kind of liking this. And I remembered all the vacations I took to northern Wisconsin, long swims in the lake, and the years I lived right along Lake Michigan and would take long swims in the morning before the lifeguards came on. So I changed my plan. I said, no, I'm not going to the mountains of the Southwest. And 12 years before, I had almost made a desperation move to Mexico, where I could stretch my Social Security check. I said, I'm going to Mexico. I'm going to find myself a sleepy little beach community where I can be in the water every day. And that gets us up to Mexico. And something's going wrong with this video. And it's 20 minutes. Maybe, hopefully, that makes sense when you see the dynamic between the mountains and the sea, which still is pulling on me. And nobody's listening anymore anyway. I guess this is one for me. It'll have like 2 viewers.